Good morning. We are beginning today with the Vishnu Mahapurana, Book 2, from the start of Book 2, Chapter 1. Although it continues directly in the conversation between Maitreya and Parashara, where Book 1 left off. Maitreya said, "You have related to me, Venerable Guru, most fully all that I was curious to hear respecting the creation of the world. But there is a part of the subject which I am desirous again to have described. You stated that Priyavrata and Uttanapada were the sons of Swayambhuva Manu, and you repeated the story of Dhruva, the son of Uttanapada. You have made no mention of the descendants of Priyavrata, and it is an account of his family that I beg you will kindly communicate to me." Parashara said, "Priyavrata married Kamya, the daughter of the Prajapati Kardama, and had by her 2 daughters, Samrat and Kukshi, and 10 sons, wise, valiant, modest, and dutiful, named Agnidhra, Agnibahu, Vapushmat, Dyutimat, Medhatiti, Bhavya, Sabala, Putra, and the 10th was Jyotishmat, illustrious by nature as by name. These were the sons of Priyavrata, famous for strength and prowess. Of these 3, Medhaputra and Agnibahu adopted a religious life. Remembering the occurrences of a prior existence, they did not covet dominion, but diligently practiced the rites of devotion in due season, wholly disinterested. Disinterested meaning in worldly attachments, and looking for no reward. Priyavrata, having divided the earth into 7 continents, gave them respectively to his other 7 sons. To Agnidhra he gave Jambudvipa, to Medhatiti he gave Plakshadvipa. He installed Vapushmat in the sovereignty over the Dvipa of Shalmali, and made Jyotishmat king of Kushadvipa. He appointed Dyutimat to rule over Kronchadvipa, Bhavya to reign over Shakadvipa, and Savala he nominated the monarch of the Dvipa of Pushkara. Agnidhra, the king of Jambudvipa. We normally hear the most about Jambudvipa because we live in Jambudvipa. Jambudvipa typically is associated with the entire Earth that we know. The others extend into regions which, while technically part of Bhumiloka, extend beyond the known modern Earth of today. Agnidhra, the king of Jambudvipa, had 9 sons, equal in splendor to the Prajapatis. They were named Nabhi, Kimpurusha, Hariravarsha, Ilavrata, Ramya, Himvat, Kuru, Bhadrashva, and Ketumala. Ketumala was a prince ever active in the practice of piety. Hear next, Maitreya, in what manner Agnidhra appointed Jambudvipa amongst his 9 sons. He gave to Nabhi the country called Hima, south of the Himavat, or the snowy mountains. The country of Hemakuta he gave to Kimpurusha, and to Harivarsha the country of Nishadha. The region in the center of which Mount Meru is situated he conferred on Ilavrata, and to Ramya the countries lying between it and the Nila mountain, meaning the Blue Mountain. To Hiranvat his father gave the country lying to the north of it, called Shveta, and on the north of the Shveta mountains, meaning the White Mountains, the country bounded by the Sringavan range he gave to Kuru. The countries on the east of Meru he assigned to Bhadrashva, and Gandhamadana, which lay west of it, he gave to Ketumala. Having installed his sons sovereigns in these several regions, the pious king Agnidhra retired to a life of tapas at the holy place of pilgrimage, Salagrama. The 8 varshas, or countries, Kimpurusha and the rest, which were each named after their first king, are places of perfect enjoyment. So the 8 varshas, meaning all of them except for Bharatavarsha. The other 8 are places of perfect enjoyment, where happiness is spontaneous and uninterrupted. In them there is no vicissitude, nor the dread of decrepitude or death. There is no distinction of virtue or vice, nor difference of degree as better or worse, nor any of the effects produced in this region by the revolutions of the yugas. This region, of course, being the 9th Bharatavarsha. Nabhi, who had for his portion the country of Himahla, had by his queen Meru the magnanimous Rishabha, and he had 100 sons. He, Rishabha, had 100 sons, the eldest of whom was Bharata. Rishabha, having ruled with equity and wisdom, and celebrated many sacrificial rites, resigned the sovereignty of the earth to the heroic Bharata, his son, and retiring to the hermitage of Pulastya, adopted the life of an anchorite, practicing religious tapas and performing all prescribed ceremonies until, emaciated by his austerity so as to be but a collection of skin and fibers, he put a pebble in his mouth, and naked went the way of all flesh. In other words, died. The country was termed Bharata from the time that it was relinquished to Bharata by his father on his retiring to the woods. Bharata, having religiously discharged or dharmically discharged the duties of his station, in time consigned the kingdom to his son Sumati, a most virtuous prince, and engaging in devout practices, Bharata abandoned his life at the holy place of Salagrama. He was afterwards born again as a Brahmana in a distinguished family of ascetics. I shall later relate to you his history. From the illustrious Sumati was born Indradyumna. His son was Parameshtin. His son was Pratihara, who had a celebrated son named Pratiharta. His son was Bhava, who begot Udgita, who begot Prastara, whose son was Pratu. The son of Pratu was Nakta. His son was Gaya. So this is clearly a Pratu other than the famous Pratu, the partial avatar of Vishnu, who was the son of Venu. This is a different Pratu. The son of this Pratu was Nakta. His son was Gaya. His son was Nara, whose son was Virat. The valiant son of Virat was Dhimat, who begot Mahanta, whose son was Manasyu, whose son was Twashta, not the Deva Twashta, but someone named after that Deva. His son was Viraja. His son was Raja. His son was Shatajit, who had 100 sons, of whom Vishvagyotish was the eldest. Under these princes, Bharatavarsha was divided into 9 portions, and their descendants successively held possession of the country for 71 periods of the aggregate of the 4 yugas, in other words, for 1 Manvantara. This was the creation of Svayambhuva Manu, by which the earth was peopled, when he presided over the first Manvantara in the Kalpa of Varaha, which is the present Kalpa, the Shveta Varaha Kalpa. Chapter 2. Maitreya said, "You have related to me, Brahman, the creation of Svayambhuva. I am now desirous to hear from you a description of the earth. How many are its oceans and islands, its kingdoms and its mountains, its forests and its rivers, and the cities of the gods upon the earth? Its dimensions, its contents, its nature, and its form." And again, like we talked about in the Bhagavata Purana, by the earth here, the term being translated as the earth here is Bhumandala, and it is not the earth of our experience. It is a far vaster realm, as you can tell even by the description we just had, which put the entire earth where the yugas occur, where suffering occurs, where there are differences in the fortune of people, as being in only one of the 9 varshas of only one of the 7 dvipas of this overwhelmingly vaster expanded earth that reaches into what we would commonly call other lokas, although technically speaking, it is all part of Bhumi Loka. Parashara replied, "You shall hear, Maitreya, a brief account of the earth from me. A full detail I could not give you in a century. The 7 great insular continents are Jambu, Plaksha, Salmali, Kusha, Kroncha, Shaka, and Pushkara. And those are, as we discussed in the Bhagavatam, the great ring dvipas. Jambu Dvipa, so those were given in order from the center out, Jambu Dvipa being a roughly circular continent in the center, and each of those others, Plaksha, Salmali, Kusha, Krancha, Shaka, and Pushkara, being concentric rings. And they are surrounded severally by 7 great seas, rings of liquid between the rings of land. Counting from inward to outward, they are the sea of salt water, Lavana Samudra, the sea of sugarcane juice, Ikshu Samudra, the sea of wine, Sura Samudra, the sea of ghee, Sarpi Samudra, the sea of curds, Dadhi Samudra, the sea of milk, Dugdha Samudra, also called Kshira Samudra or Kshira Sagara, and the sea of fresh water, Jala Samudra. Jambu Dvipa is in the center of all these, and in the center of this Dvipa is the golden mountain, Meru. The height of Meru is 84,000 yojanas. So that just the height of this one mountain, Meru, is many, many times the size of the Earth planet that we experience today. And its depth below the surface of the Earth is 16,000. Its diameter at the summit is 32,000 yojanas, and at its base, 16,000. So that this mountain is like the seed cup of the lotus of the Earth. So the seed cup of the lotus looks like, it's shaped like a funnel, or like a cylinder that's wider at the top than at the bottom. It's very unlike in shape any other mountain, in that it widens on the way up. It looks like an inverted funnel, except of course it's not hollow. I mean, it is full of caves, but it's not completely hollow. The boundary mountains around Meru are Himavan, Hemakuta, and Nishadha, which lie south of Meru, and Nila, Shveta, and Sringi, which are situated to the north of it. The 2 central ranges, those next to Meru, Nishadha to the south and Nila to the north, extend for 100,000 yojanas running east to west across the entire Jambudvipa. Each of the others diminishes 10,000 yojanas as it lies more remote from the center. So they all run east to west, coast to coast across the entirety of Jambudvipa. Of course, that's less long as you get further from the center of the circle. They are 2,000 yojanas in height and as many in breadth. The varshas, or countries between these ranges, are Bharata, south of the Himavan mountains. Next, Kimpurusha, between Himavan and Hemakuta. North of Hemakuta and south of Nishadha is Harivarsha. North of Meru is Ramyaka, extending from the Nila, or the Blue Mountains, to the Shveta, or the White Mountains. That's Ramyaka. Hiranmaya lies between the Shveta and Sringi ranges, and Uttarakuru is beyond the Sringi, following the same direction as Bharata. In other words, as Bharatavarsha is the far south of Jambudvipa, Uttarakuru is the far north. Each of these is 9,000 yojanas in extent. Ilavrata is of similar dimensions, but in the center of it is the golden mountain Meru, and the country extends 9,000 yojanas in each direction from the 4 sides of the mountain. There are 4 mountains in this Varsha, formed as buttresses to Meru, each 10,000 yojanas in elevation. That on the east is called Mandara, that on the south, Gandhamadana, that on the west, Vipula, and that on the north, Suparshva. On each of these stands severally a Kadamba tree, a Jambu tree, a Peepal tree, and the Vata tree, each spreading over 1,100 yojanas and towering aloft like banners on the mountains. From the Jambu tree, the insular continent Jambudvipa derives its appellation. The apples of that tree, and a Jambu tree is not an apple tree, but a rose apple tree. So the rose apples of that tree are as large as elephants. When they are rotten, they fall upon the crest of the mountain, and from their expressed juice is formed the Jambu River, the waters of which, are drunk by the inhabitants, and in consequence of drinking from that stream, they pass their days in content and health, being subject neither to perspiration, to foul odors, to decrepitude, nor organic decay. Which is not to mean that they live forever. They eventually die, but they die without passing through old age first. The soil on the banks of the river, absorbing the jumbo juice and being dried by gentle breezes, becomes the gold termed jambunada, of which the ornaments of the siddhas are fabricated. The country of Bhadrashva lies on the east of Meru, and Ketumala on the west, and between these two is the region of Ilavrata. On the east of the same, in other words, toward the east of Ilavrata, is the forest Chaitrarata. The Gandhamadana wood is on the south, named after the mountain Gandhamadana, which is also to the south. The forest of Vaibhraja is on the west, and the grove of Indra, called Nandana, is on the north. There are also 4 great lakes, the waters of which are partaken of by the gods, called Arunoda, Mahabhadra, Shitoda, and Manasa. The principal mountain ridges which project from the base of Meru like filaments from the root of the lotus are named, on the east, Sitanta, Mukunda, Kurari, Malyavan, and Vaikanka. On the south, Trikuta, Shishira, Patanga, Rochaka, and Nishadha. On the west, Shikivasas, Vaidurya, Kapila, Gandhamadana, and Jarudhi. So, if you're trying to follow all of this geography, a point of possible confusion here, there's 2 separate mountains called Gandhamadana. There is the great mountain Gandhamadana, which stands separately south of Meru. There is also a ridge extending west from the base of Meru by the same name, Gandhamadana, and they are not the same place. And Jarudhi. And on the north, the ridges extending from the base of Meru are Shankahuta, Rishabha, Naga, Hansa, and Kalanjara. These and others extend from between the intervals in the body or from the heart of Meru. On the summit of Meru is the vast city of Brahma, extending 14,000 leagues and renowned in heaven, and around it, in the cardinal points and the intermediate quarters, are situated the stately cities of Indra and the other regents of the spheres. So Brahmapura in the center, city of Indra on the east, and then going around, you would have the cities of Agni Deva, Yama Deva, Nritti Devi, Varuna, Vayu, Kubera, and Ishana. The capital of Brahma is enclosed by the river Ganga, which, issuing from the foot of Vishnu and washing the lunar orb, falls here from the skies in a great waterfall landing in the center of Brahmapura on the top of Meru. And after encircling the city, divides into 4 mighty rivers flowing in opposite directions. These rivers are the Sita, the Alakananda, the Chakshu, and the Bhadra. The Sita Ganga, falling upon the tops of the inferior mountains on the east side of Meru. So there's these 4 eternal waterfalls pouring off the 4 sides of the mesa on the top of Mount Meru. The Sita Ganga flows over the mountain's crests and passes through the country of Bhadrashva to the ocean. The Alakananda flows south to the country of Bharata, and dividing into 7 rivers on the way, tails into the sea. So one of those is the river Ganga that we know here on our earth. The Chakshu falls into the sea after traversing all the western mountains and passing through the country of Ketumala, and the Bhadra washes the country of the Uttarakurus and empties itself into the northern ocean. Meru then is confined between the mountains Nila and Nishadha on the north and south, and between Malyavan and Gandhamadana on the west and east. It lies between them like the pericarp of a lotus. The countries of Bharata, Ketumala, Bhadrashva, and Uttarakuru lie, like leaves of the lotus of the world, exterior to the boundary mountains. Jatara and Devakuta are 2 mountain ranges running north and south and connecting the 2 chains of Nishadha and Nila. Gandhamadana and Kailasa extend east and west, 80 yojanas in breadth from sea to sea. This again is referring to the celestial Mount Kailasa of Shiva, not the mountain Kailasa that we have in our earth. Nishadha and Pariyatra are the limitative mountains on the west, stretching like those on the east between the Nila and Nishadha ranges, and the mountains Trashranga and Jarudhi are the northern limits of Meru, extending east and west between the two seas. Thus, I have repeated to you the mountains described by great sages as the boundary mountains, situated in pairs on each of the four sides of Meru. Those also which have been mentioned as the filament mountains or spurs, Shitanta and the rest, are exceedingly delightful. The valleys embosomed amongst them are the favorite resorts of the Siddhas and Charanas, and there are situated upon them agreeable forests and pleasant cities, embellished with the palaces of Vishnu, Lakshmi, Agni, Surya, and other deities, and peopled by celestial spirits, whilst the Yakshas, Rakshasas, Daityas, and Danavas pursue their pastimes in the vales. These, in short, are the regions of paradise or Svarga, the seats of the righteous, and where the wicked do not arrive even after 100 births, if they remain wicked. In the country of Bhadrashva, Vishnu resides as Hayashirsha, the horse-headed, also known as Hayagriva, an avatar of Vishnu that resides permanently in Bhadrashva. In Ketumala, he resides as Varaha, the boar. In Bharata, he resides as the turtle, Kurma. In Kuru, as the fish, Matsya. In his universal form, of course, he resides everywhere, for Hari pervades all places. O Maitreya, he is the supporter of all things. He is all things. In the 8 realms of Kimpurusha and the rest, the 8 other than Bharatavarsha, there is no sorrow, nor weariness, nor anxiety, nor hunger, nor apprehension. Their inhabitants are exempt from all infirmity and pain, and live in uninterrupted enjoyment for 10 to 12,000 years, before finally dying, but without ever having passed through old age. Indra never sends rain upon them, for the earth abounds with water. So in other words, there's rivers and streams and lakes everywhere, but it never rains. The water all just flows down from the mountains. In those places, there is no distinction of Krita, Treta, or any succession of yugas. In each of these varshas, there are respectively 7 principal ranges of mountains, from which, O best of Brahmins, hundreds of rivers take their rise. Chapter 3. The country that lies north of the ocean and south of the snowy mountains, the Himalaya mountains, is called Bharata, for there dwelt the descendants of Bharata. It is 9,000 leagues in extent and is the land of karma, in consequence of which humans go to heaven or obtain moksha. The 7 main chains of mountains in Bharata are Mahendra, Malaya, Sahya, Shuktimat, Riksha, Vindhya, and Paripatra. And we are now very clearly, for the first time now, talking about India, since these are all, the Mahendra, Malaya, Sahya, Shuktimat, Riksha, Vindhya, and Paripatra mountains are all known mountains in India. You can plot them on a map today. From this region, heaven is obtained, or even in some cases, liberation from worldly existence. Or humans pass from hence into the condition of brutes, or fall into Naraka. Heaven, moksha, a state in mid-air, living in Bhuvaraloka, for example, or in the subterraneous realms, succeeds to existence here, and the world of acts is not, the karma loka is not the title of any other portion of the universe. The Varsha of Bharata is divided into 9 portions, which I will name to you. They are Indra Dvipa, Kaserumat, Tamravarna, Gabhistamat, Naga Dvipa, Somya, Gandharva, and Varuna. The 9th or last Dvipa is surrounded by the ocean and is 1,000 yojanas from north to south. On the east of Bharata dwell the Kiratas, on the west, the Yavanas. In the center reside Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras occupied in their respective duties of yajna, arms, trade, and service. The Shatdru, Chandrabhaga, and other rivers flow from the foot of Himalaya. The Veda Smriti and other rivers from the Paripatra mountains. The Narmada and Surasa flow from the Vindhya hills. The Tapi, Payoshni, and Nirvindhya flow from the Riksha mountains. The Godavari, Bhimarati, Krishnaveni, and others flow from the Sahya mountains. The Kritamala, Tamraparni, and others flow from the Malaya hills. The Trisama, Rishikulya, etc., flow from the Mahendra mountains, and the Rishikulya, Komati, and others flow from the Shuktimat mountains. Of such as these and of minor rivers, there is an infinite number, and many nations inhabit the countries on their borders. The principal nations of Bharata are, and of course, all of this is referring to when Parashara was speaking. So in that time, the principal nations of Bharata are the Kurus and Panchalas in the middle districts, the people of Kamarupa in the east, the Pundras, Kalingas, Magadhas, and southern nations are in the south. In the extreme west are the Saurashtras, Shuras, Bhiras, Arbudas, the Karushas and Malavas dwelling along the Paripatra mountains, the Sauviras, the Saindhavas, the Hunas, the Salvas, the people of Shakala, the Madras, the Ramas, the Ambhastas, and the Parasikas, and others. These nations drink of the water of the rivers above enumerated and inhabit their borders happy and prosperous. In the Bharatavarsha, it is that the succession of 4 yugas, the Krita and the Treta, the Dvapara and Kali, takes place. It is in the Bharatavarsha that pious ascetics engage in rigorous tapas, that devout men offer yajnas, and that gifts are distributed all for the sake of another world. In Jambudvipa, Vishnu, consisting of yajna, is worshipped as the Purusha of sacrificial rites with sacrificial ceremonies. He is adored under other forms elsewhere. Bharata is therefore the best of the divisions of Jambudvipa because it is the land of karma. The others are places of enjoyment alone. It is only after many thousand births and the aggregation of much merit that living beings are sometimes born in Bharata as humans. The Devas themselves exclaim, "Happy are those who are born, even from the condition of Devas, as humans in Bharatavarsha, as that is the way to the pleasures of paradise, or the greater blessing of final moksha. Happy are they who, consigning all the unheeded rewards of their acts to the supreme and eternal Vishnu, obtain existence in that land of karma as their path to him. We know not when the acts that have obtained us heaven shall have been fully recompensed, where we shall renew corporeal confinement, but we know that those men are fortunate who are born with perfect faculties in Bharatavarsha." I have thus briefly described to you, Maitreya, the 9 divisions of Jambudvipa, which is 100,000 yojanas in extent and which is encircled as if by a bracelet by the ocean of salt water of similar dimensions. In other words, 100,000 yojanas of salt water across in any direction before you hit the next dvipa. Of course, there are islands within it. Chapter 4. In the same manner, Parashara goes on, as Jambudvipa is girt round about by the ocean of salt water, so that ocean is surrounded by the insular continent of Plaksha, the extent of which is twice that of Jambudvipa, or 200,000 yojanas thick. Medhatiti, who was made sovereign of Plaksha, had 7 sons: Shantabhaya, Shishira, Sukhodaya, Ananda, Shiva, Kshemaka, and Dhruva. And the Dvipa was divided amongst them, and each division was named after the prince to whom it was subject. The several kingdoms were bounded by as many ranges of mountains, named severally Gomeda, Chandra, Narada, Dundhubi, Somaka, Sumanas, and Vaibharaja. In these mountains, the sinless inhabitants ever dwell, along with celestial spirits and gods who dwell there with them in body. In them are many holy places, and the people there live for a long period, exempt from care and pain, and enjoying uninterrupted felicity. There are also in the 7 divisions of Plaksha 7 rivers flowing to the sea, whose names alone are sufficient to take away sin. They are the Anutapta, Shiki, Vipasa, Tridiva, Kramu, Amrita, and Sukrita. These are the chief rivers and mountains of Plakshadvipa, which I have enumerated to you, but there are thousands of others of inferior magnitude. The people who drink of the waters of those rivers are always contented and happy, and there is neither decrease nor increase amongst them. Neither are the revolutions of the four yugas known in these varshas. The character of the time is there uniformly that of the Treta Yuga. In the 5 dvipas, worthy Brahmana, from Plaksha or Shaka, the length of life is 5,000 years, and religious merit is divided amongst the several castes and orders of the people. The varnas there, corresponding severally with Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra that we have here in Jambudvipa, there are called Aryaka, Kuru, Vivasa, and Bhavi. In this dvipa is a large fig tree of similar size as the Jambu tree of Jambudvipa, and this dvipa is called Plaksha after the name of the tree. Hari, who is all and the creator of all, is worshipped in this continent in the form of Soma, the moon. Plakshadvipa is surrounded, as if by a disk, by the sea of molasses, of the same extent as the land. Such, Maitreya, is a brief description of Plakshadvipa. The hero Vapushmat was king of the next, the Shalmala Dvipa, whose 7 sons also gave designations to 7 varshas or divisions of that dvipa. Their names were Shveta, Harita, Jimuta, Rohita, Vaidyuta, Manasa, and Suprabha. The Ikshu Sea is encompassed by the continent of Shalmala, which is twice its extent. There are 7 principal mountain ranges abounding in precious gems and dividing the varshas from each other, and there are also 7 chief rivers. The mountains are called Kumuda, Unnata, Valahaka, Drona, which is fertile in medicinal herbs, Kanka, Mahisha, and Kakudvat. The rivers are Yoni, Toya, Vitrishna, Chandra, Mahisha, Shukla, Vimochani, and Nivritti, all of whose waters cleanse away sins. The Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras of this dvipa are instead called Kapilas, Arunas, Portas, and Rohitas, meaning the tawny, the purple, the yellow, and the red. They worship the imperishable soul of all things, Vishnu, in the form of Vayu, the wind, with pious rites, and enjoy frequent association with the gods. A large shalmali, or silk cotton tree, grows in this dvipa and gives it its name. The dvipa is surrounded by the Sura Sea, the sea of wine, of the same extent as itself. The Sura Sea is entirely encircled by Kushadvipa, which is every way twice the size of the preceding continent. The king Jyotishmat had 7 sons, Udbhida, Venuman, Svairata, Lavana, Dhriti, Prabhakara, and Kapila, after whom the 7 portions or varshas of the island were called Udbhida, etc. There reside humans, along with Daityas and Danavas, as well as with spirits of heaven and Devas. The 4 castes, assiduously devoted to their respective duties, are there termed Damis, Sushmis, Snehas, and Mandehas, who, in order to be relieved of the obligations imposed upon them in the discharge of their several functions, worship Janardana in the form of Brahma, and thus get rid of the unpleasant duties which lead to temporal rewards. The 7 principal mountains in this dvipa are named Vidruma, Hemashela, Dyutiman, Pushpavan, Kusheshaya, Hari, and Mandara, and the 7 rivers are Dhutapapa, Shiva, Pavitra, Sammati, Vidyudambha, Mahavanya, Sarvapapahara. Besides these, there are numerous rivers and mountains of less importance. Kushadvipa is so named from a clump of kusha grass growing there. It is surrounded by the Ghrita Sea, the sea of butter, of the same size as the continent. The Sea of Ghrita is encompassed by Kronchadvipa, which is twice as large as Kushadvipa. And by large, we always mean in thickness of the ring, the diameter of the ring. The king of this Dvipa was Dyutiman, whose sons and the 7 Varshas named after them were Kushala, Mallaga, Ushna, Pivara, Andhakaraka, Muni, and Dundhubi. The 7 boundary mountains, pleasing to gods and celestial spirits who reside there, are Kroncha, Vamana, Andhakaraka, Devavrit, Pundarikavan, Dundhubi, and Mahashaila, each of which is in succession twice as lofty as the series that precedes it, in the same manner as each Dvipa is twice as extensive as the one before it. The inhabitants reside there without apprehension, associating with the bands of divinities. The Brahmanas there are called Pushkaras, Kshatriyas Pushkalas, the Vaishyas are termed Dhanyas, and the Shudras Tishyas. They drink of countless streams, of which the principal are denominated Gauri, Kumavati, Sandhya, Ratri, Manojava, Kshanti, and Pundarika. The divine Vishnu, the protector of humankind, is worshipped there by the people with holy rites in the form of Rudra. Kronsha is surrounded by the Sea of Kurds, of a similar extent, and that again is encompassed by Shaka Dvipa. The sons of Bhavya, the first king of Shaka Dvipa, after whom its Varshas were denominated, were Jalada, Kumara, Sukumara, Manichaka, Kusumoda, Modaki, and Mahadruma. The 7 mountains separating the countries were Udayagiri, Jaladhara, Raivataka, Shyama, Ambikeya, Ramya, and Keshari. There grows a large shaka, or teak tree, frequented by the Siddhas and Gandharvas, the wind from which, as produced by its fluttering leaves, diffuses delight. The sacred lands of this continent are peopled by the 4 castes. Its 7 holy rivers that wash away all sin are the Sukumari, Kumari, Nalini, Dhenuka, Ikshu, Venuka, and Gabasti. There are also hundreds and thousands of minor streams and mountains in this Dvipa, and the inhabitants of Jalada and the other divisions drink of those waters with pleasure after they have returned to earth from Indra's heaven. In those 7 districts, there is no dereliction of virtue, there is no contention, there is no deviation from rectitude. The Varna of Mriga is that of the Brahmana, the Magadha of the Kshatriya, the Manasa of the Vaishya, and the Mandaga of the Shudra, and by these Vishnu is devoutly worshipped as the sun, with appropriate ceremonies. Shakadvipa is encircled by the sea of milk, as by an armlet, and the sea is of the same breadth as the Dvipa which it embraces, as in all cases. The Kshiroda ocean, or the sea of milk, is encompassed by the 7th Dvipa, or Pushkara, which is twice the size of Shakadvipa. Savana, who was made its first sovereign, had but 2 sons, Mahavira and Dhatoki, after whom the 2 Varshas of Pushkara were so named. So it's just the vast outer ring continent is simply divided into 2 halves. These are divided by the mighty range of mountains called Manasotara, which runs in a circular direction, forming an outer and an inner circle. Oh, so not divided into 2 halves around this way, but divided into 2 halves split all the way around it. This mountain is 50,000 yojanas in height and as many in its breadth, dividing the Dvipa in the middle as if with a bracelet into 2 divisions, which are also of a circular form like the mountain that separates them. Of these 2, the Mahavira Varsha is exterior to the circumference of Manasotara, and Dhataki lies within the circle, and both are frequented by heavenly spirits and gods. There are no other mountains in Pushkara Dvipa, neither are there any rivers. Humans in this Dvipa live 1,000 years, less than in the inner Dvipas, free from sickness and sorrow, and unruffled by anger or affection. There is neither virtue nor vice, killer nor slain. There is no jealousy, envy, fear, hatred, covetousness, nor any moral defect. Neither is there truth or falsehood. Food is spontaneously produced there, and all the inhabitants feed upon viands of every flavor. Humans there are indeed of the same nature with devas and of the same form and habits. There is no distinction of caste or order. There are no fixed institutes, nor are rites performed for the sake of any advantage. The 3 Vedas, the Puranas, ethics and polity, and the laws of service are unknown there. Pushkara is, in fact, in both its divisions, a terrestrial paradise where time yields happiness to all its inhabitants who are exempt from sickness and decay. A Nyagrodha tree grows on this dvipa, which is the special abode of Brahma, and he resides in it, adored by the Devas and Asuras. Pushkara is surrounded by the sea of fresh water, which is of equal extent with the continent it invests. In this manner, the 7 great dvipas are encompassed successively by the 7 oceans, and each ocean and continent is respectively of twice the extent of that which precedes it. In all the oceans, the water remains at all times the same in quantity and never increases or diminishes. But like the water in a cauldron, which in consequence of its combination with heat expands, so the waters of the ocean swell with the increase of the moon. In other words, tides, like in our oceans here. The waters, although really neither more nor less, dilate or contract as the moon increases or wanes in the light and dark fortnights. The rise and fall of the waters of the different seas is 510 inches. In other words, that is the difference between the high tide mark and the low tide mark. Beyond the sea of fresh water is a region of twice its extent, where the land is made of gold and where no living beings reside. Thence extends, past that, extends the Loka mountain, which literally means the world, not world mountain, because it's like the outer wall of the great Bhumandala disk. Within it is the world. Without it, you are outside the world, hence its name. It is 10,000 yojanas in breadth and 10,000 in height, and beyond it, perpetual in darkness invests the mountain all around, which darkness is again encompassed by the shell of the egg, the shell of the Brahmanda egg. Such Maitreya is the earth, which with its continents, mountains, oceans, and exterior shell is 50 crores or 500 million yojanas in extent. It is the mother and nurse of all creatures, the foundation of all worlds, and the chief of the elements. Chapter 5. Parashara said, "The extent of the surface of the earth has been thus described to you, Maitreya. Its depth below the surface is said to be 70,000 yojanas, each of the 7 regions of Patala, extending downwards 10,000. These 7 worthy Muni are called Atala, Vitala, Nitala, Gabhistimat, Mahatala, Sutala, and Patala. Their soil is severally white in Atala, black in Vitala, purple in Nitala, yellow in Gabhastimat, sandy in Mahatala, stony in Sutala, and made of gold in Patala. They are embellished with magnificent palaces in which dwell numerous Danavas, Daityas, Yakshas, and great Nagas. The Muni Narada, after his return from those regions to the heavens, declared amongst the celestial devas that Patala was much more delightful than Indra's Svarga. What, exclaimed the sage, can be compared to Patala, where the Nagas are decorated with brilliant and beautiful and pleasure-shedding jewels? Who will not delight in Patala, where the lovely daughters of the Daityas and Danavas wander about, fascinating even the most austere, where the rays of the sun diffuse light but not heat by day, and where the moon shines by night for illumination, but it does not become cold, where the sons of Danu, happy in the enjoyment of delicious viands and strong wines, know not the passage of time. There are beautiful groves and streams and lakes, where the lotus blows, and the skies are resonant with the song of the coil bird. Splendid ornaments, fragrant perfumes, rich unguents, the blended music of the lute and pipe and drum, these and many other enjoyments are the common portion of the Danavas, Daityas, and Nagas who inhabit the regions of Patala. Below the 7 Patalas is the form of Vishnu, proceeding from the quality of tamas, which is called Shesha, the excellencies of which neither Daityas nor Danavas can fully enumerate. This being is called Ananta by the spirits of heaven, and is worshipped by sages and by gods. He has 1,000 heads, which are embellished with the pure and visible mystic sign. And the 1,000 jewels in his crests give light to all the regions. The mystic sign on each of his heads is, of course, the swastika. For the benefit of the world, he deprives the asuras of their strength, stopping them from overwhelming everywhere with chaos. He rolls his eyes fiercely as if intoxicated. He wears a single earring, a diadem, and a wreath upon each brow, and shines like the white mountains topped with flame. He is clothed in purple raiment and ornamented with a white necklace, and looks like another Kailasa, with the heavenly Ganga flowing down its precipices. In one hand he holds a plow, and in the other a pestle, and he is attended by Varuni, the goddess of wine, who is his own embodied radiance. From his mouths, at the end of the kalpa, proceeds the venomed fire that, impersonated as Rudra, who is one with Balarama, devours the 3 worlds. Shesha bears the entire world like a diadem upon his head, and he is the foundation on which the 7 patalas rest. His power, his glory, his form, his nature cannot be described, cannot be comprehended by the devas themselves. Who shall recount his might who wears this whole earth like a garland of flowers, tinged of a purple dye by the radiance of the jewels of his crests? When Ananta, his eyes rolling with intoxication, yawns, then earth with all her woods and mountains, and seas and rivers trembles. Gandharvas, Apsaras, Siddhas, Kinnaras, Uragas, and Charanas are unequal to him in his praises, and therefore he is called the infinite Ananta, the imperishable. The sandal paste that is ground by the Naginis is scattered abroad by his breath and sheds perfume around the skies. The ancient sage Garga, having propitiated Shesha, acquired from him a knowledge of the principles of astronomical science of the planets and of good and evil denoted by the aspects of the heavens, in other words, Jyotisha Shastra. The earth, sustained upon the head of this sovereign serpent, supports in its turn the garland of the spheres, along with their inhabitants, humans, asuras, and devas. Chapter 6. O great Muni, listen, I will now give you an account of the Narakas, which are situated below the earth and beneath the waters, and into which sinners are finally sent. Raurava, Shukara, Rodha, Tala, Vishasana, Mahajvala, Taptakumbha, Lavana, Vimohana, Rudhirandha, Vaitarani, Krimisha, Krimibhojana, Asipatravana, Krishna, Lala Bhaksha, Daruna, Puyavaha, Papa, Vahni Jvala, Adhoshiras, Sandhamsha, Kalasutra, Tamas, Avici, Svabhojana, Apratishta, and another Avici. So there are 2 separate Narakas, both with the name Avici. These and many other fearful and terrible Narakas are the awful provinces of the kingdom of Yama, terrible with instruments of torture and with fire, into which are hurled all those who are addicted when alive to sinful practices. The man who bears false witness through partiality or who utters any falsehood is condemned to the Raurava Naraka. He who causes abortion, plunders a town, kills a cow, or strangles a man goes to the Rodha Naraka, or that of obstruction. The murderer of a Brahmana, stealer of gold, or drinker of wine goes to the Shukara Naraka, as does anyone who associates with them in the performance of these acts. The murderer of a man of the Kshatriya or Vaishya caste, or one who is guilty of adultery with the wife of his guru, is sentenced to the Tala Naraka, and one who holds incestuous intercourse with a sister or murders an ambassador to Taptakumbha. The seller of his wife as a slave, a gauler, a horse dealer, and one who deserts his adherents falls into the Taptaloha Naraka. He who commits incest with a daughter-in-law or with one's own daughter is cast into the Mahajvala Naraka, and he who is disrespectful to his spiritual guide, who is abusive to his betters, who reviles the Vedas or who sells them, who associates with women in a prohibited degree, typically meaning rapists, into the Lavana Naraka. A thief and a contemptor of prescribed observances falls into Vimohana, the Naraka of bewilderment. He who hates his father, the Brahmanas and the gods, and who spoils precious gems, is punished in the Bhaksha Naraka, and he who practices magic rites for the harm of others in the Naraka called Krimisha, the realm of insects. The vile wretch who eats his meal before offering food to the devas, to the pitris, or to guests falls into the Naraka called Lala Bhaksha. The maker of arrows is, interestingly, the maker of arrows is sentenced to the Vedhaka Naraka, and the maker of lances, swords, and other weapons to the dreadful Naraka called Vishasana. He who takes unlawful gifts goes, or like, for example, a politician accepting bribes, goes to the Adhomukha Naraka, or the upside down Naraka, as does one who offers sacrifices to improper objects and an observer of the stars in an improper way. He who eats by himself sweetmeats mixed with his rice, and a Brahmana who vends lakh, flesh, liquors, sesamum, or salt, or one who commits violence falls into the Naraka of Puyavaha, as do they who rear cats, cocks, goats, dogs, hogs, or birds for fighting, putting on animal fights. Public performers, fishermen, the follower of one born in adultery, a poisoner, an informant, one who lives by his wife's prostitution, one who attends to secular affairs on the days of the Parvas, an incendiary, meaning an arsonist, a treacherous friend, a false soothsayer, one who performs religious ceremonies for rustics, and those who sell the acid Asclepius used in yajnas go to the Rudhirandha Naraka, the land of the wells of blood. He who destroys beehives or pillages a hamlet is condemned to the Vaitarani Naraka. He who causes impotence, trespasses in others' lands, is impure, or who lives by fraud is punished in the Naraka called Krishna. No relation to Krishna, the form of Bhagavan, of course. He who wants only to cut down trees goes to the Asipatravana Naraka, the leaves of whose trees are like swords, and a tender on sheep and hunter of deer to the Naraka called Vatni Jvala, as do those who apply fire to unbaked vessels. The violator of a vow, one who breaks the rules of his order, falls into the Sandansha Naraka, and the religious student who sleeps in the day and who is though unconsciously defiled, and they who mature are instructed in sacred literature by their children, receive punishment in the Naraka called Svabhojana. These Narakas and hundreds of thousands of others are the places in which sinners pay the penalty of their crimes. As numerous as are the offenses that humans commit, so many are the Narakas in which they are punished, because each punishment creates its own Naraka by consequence of karma. And all who deviate from the duties imposed upon them by their varna and condition, whether in thought, word, or deed, are sentenced to punishment in the regions of the damned. The gods in heaven are beheld by the inhabitants of Naraka as they move with their heads inverted. In other words, they're upside down from each other's perspective. While the devas, as they cast their eyes downwards, behold the sufferings of those in Naraka. The various stages of existence, Maitreya, are inanimate things, fish, birds, animals, humans, holy humans, gods, and liberated spirits, each in succession 1,000 degrees superior to that which precedes it. And through these stages, the beings that are either in Svarga or in Naraka are destined to proceed until final moksha be obtained. That sinner goes to Naraka who neglects the due expiation of his guilt. For Maitreya, suitable acts of expiation have been enjoined by the great sages for every kind of crime. Arduous penances for great sins, trifling ones for minor offenses, have been propounded by Swayambhuva Manu and others. But reliance upon Krishna is far better than any such expiatory acts, as religious austerity or the like. Let anyone who repents of the sin of which he may have been culpable have recourse to this best of all expiations, remembrance of Hari. By which a man shall be quickly cleansed from all guilt. The whole heap of worldly sorrows is dispersed by meditating on Hari, and his worshipper, looking upon heavenly fruition as an impediment to higher felicity, obtains final emancipation. He whose mind is devoted to Hari in silent prayer, burnt offering, or adoration, is impatient even of the glory of the King of the gods. Of what avail is ascent to the summit of Svarga if it is necessary to return from thence to earth? How different is the meditation on Vasudeva, which is the seed of eternal freedom. Hence, Muni, The man who thinks of Vishnu day and night goes not to Naraka after death, for all his sins are atoned for. Svarga is that which delights the mind, Naraka is that which gives it pain. Hence, vice is called Naraka, virtue is called Svarga. The self-same thing is applicable to the production of pleasure or pain, of malice or of anger. Whence then can it be considered as essentially the same with either? That which at one time is a source of enjoyment becomes at another the cause of suffering, and the same thing may at different seasons excite wrath or conciliate favor. It follows that nothing is in itself either pleasurable or painful, and pleasure and pain and the like are merely definitions of various states of mind. That which alone is truth is wisdom. But wisdom may be the cause of confinement to existence, for all this universe is wisdom. There is nothing different from it. And consequently, Maitreya, you are to conclude that both knowledge and ignorance are comprised in wisdom. I have thus described to you the orb of the earth and the regions below its surface, or the patalas and the narakas, and have briefly enumerated its oceans, mountains, continents, rivers, and regions. What else do you wish to hear? And I think that that's probably a good stopping point. It's almost 10 o'clock, and there is a fair amount more in this cosmological overview, but we have now finished the terrestrial and underworld portions of it. And it goes on into describing the overworld lokas, which goes on for multiple chapters and is rather lengthy. So I think we can get into that next week. So thank you guys very much for coming.
Thanks, Devala. Amazing.
Devala?
Yeah.
I'm trying to conceptualize this. It's very mind-blowing, of course. Is it like concentric circles that expand out and out and out, and then in and in and in for the nether realms?
Not exactly. Concentric circles that expand out on the surface of Bhumandala, yes. But for the nether realms, they're just below it.
Yeah. Okay, below it.
Yeah.
Not within. Not going.
Not within, just down.
Just down.
We're not talking about a spherical planet at all. The Bhumandala disk corresponds in terms of three-dimensional space that we experience not to the Earth planet, but to the flat plane of the ecliptic of the Earth. In other words, if you trace the circle that the sun draws relative to the Earth, it's a circle that expands out into space, and that mathematically corresponds to the plane of Bhumandala as described in the Puranas. And so there is simply, relative to this flat world being described, there is simply a universal cosmic up or down. They have nothing to do with the spherical Earth we experience.
Right. I knew that it was beyond Earth, and then it goes out.
Yeah. So the patalas are not within; they are simply down.
And yet, in space, there's really no up or down, so that's confusing.
Well, on one side of the plane is termed up, and the other as down.
Oh, because it's a plane.
Yeah. The plane of the ecliptic, which is mathematically projectable into space.
Ecliptic.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ecliptic is what corresponds to Bhumandala.
And this mountain range, that was fascinating. I wondered, the mountain range that goes completely around and beyond that is darkness.
The loka.
I wondered if that was similar to when Shiva was talking to, and again, this is coming from watching the Bollywood movies, but when she was talking to Sati, how beyond this place no human can go. Maybe that's different, but it seemed like it was a region that he lived that was completely different. Now that's not that mountain range then.
There isn't a form of Shiva that specifically resides on the Loka Parvata. Was it no human can go or no man can go?
No man can go. Yes, that's different.
But women could.
Oh,
there is such a place.
oh,
Yeah, there is such a place. There's a forest called Sharavana. It's in Ilavrata. Yeah, if we're going by the description we just had, near Mount Meru, there is a sacred forest of Shiva and Parvati, with an enchantment laid upon it that male beings other than Shiva cannot enter it, but female beings can.
huh,
So that might have been what that was referring to.
possibly, yeah. Wow, there's just so much.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah,
And
sometimes I want to just freeze what you have said and go, wait, I want to think on that.
yeah, or draw a map of it. There are people who have.
Maps, wow.
Yeah, you can.
It's fascinating that there's like a tree, like a major tree in each of these areas,
Yep.
and then a
that they're all
sea,
named
and
after.
then 7 suns and 7 mountains in each of them. It seems I noticed there was like that pattern.
5 of the 7 follow that pattern. Yeah.
Wow. I'm also mind blown by your awareness and knowledge, comprehension.
I've read these descriptions, and the Vishnu Purana goes over it somewhat in brief, and the Bhagavata Purana also goes over it somewhat in brief. The Bhagavata Purana actually goes into much more detail about the Patalas than the Vishnu Purana does. But there's one, the Vayu Purana, actually goes into by far the most detail and shares pages and pages of detail about all these places that isn't in any of the other Puranas. It really goes into depth on it, and there's a ton of detail. Yeah, I've kind of studied all of it. It's not particularly practical spiritual knowledge for a spiritual practitioner, describing lokas that we don't live in. But I find it kind of fun and fascinating. There's chapters and chapters of detail describing all of these otherworldly realms throughout the various Vedic literature.
It's practical in the sense that it reminds us how infinitely small and infinitesimal
Sure, yes.
and insignificant we really are as an individual.
Yeah, or even our whole Earth world. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
What would be great would be to have a cheat sheet. I find myself looking up some of the words that you say while you're talking, and I don't know necessarily if I'm discovering the right and appropriate answer. So I guess I should just listen innocently and not.
Yeah, you mean like the dozens of names of different mountains and stuff?
Actually, not even that specific. I was looking up, was it Dvipara? Dvipa?
Oh, Dvipa?
Dvipa. I was looking that up. That was the first thing I
Dvipa, it means continent or island, landmass. Yeah.
Landmass. Okay.
Yeah.
In one place it said could even be a planet, but that didn't seem.
Well, I mean, these Dvipas are much bigger than planets,
Yeah.
as we know them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was that about karma? Karma is only
They
on.
call Bharatavarsha the land of karma, meaning not that action literally doesn't exist elsewhere, but life is very different outside of Bharatavarsha from inside of Bharatavarsha. And here I mean Bharatavarsha in the sense of a region larger than and encompassing our whole Earth that we experience, rather than only talking about India.
Okay.
But that where we live, there's tons of different actions. We live in a busy world where to maintain life, there's work that needs to be done every day. And there's a vast diversity of consequence. Like people have different sorts of bodies, different levels of health, different levels of material ease or hardship or pain or comfort. And that all of this, the Shastras describe as unusual. Most of the cosmos isn't like this. That in most cases, life is much more static and even, with much less difference between two different beings, and just generally less going on and less rapid change. And so here, it's kind of like a crucible. There's a lot more suffering than in most places, other than, of course, Narakas, where there is more suffering than here. But where we live in the cosmos is a high suffering region, but also a place with very rapid potential for transformation and change and growth through the performance of actions. and the performance of sadhana.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Elsewhere, the vast majority of beings remain basically the same for 1,000 years or more.
And more contentment. So there's less drive to become enlightened, we could say.
Yes, it is not unheard of, but quite rare for beings in most of these places to ever achieve enlightenment.
Huh. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wow, that's wild.
Yes.
If I may, what we were just talking about today was 7 great insular continents.
Yeah.
Is that the general what we were going through?
That was
now, in other words,
the main
of
part,
the same. These were of the same world.
Yeah, they're all part of they're all part of the Bhumandala.
Bhumandala, right?
Yeah.
Now it started going into who was living on these in these continents or areas.
Yeah.
And now, do humans live in these other worlds?
Humans used loosely.
Right.
If you saw one of them, you might not think it was a human.
Okay.
Kind of human-like. Like these beings have many of them have a lifespan of thousands of years, do not undergo old age, have purple skin or other dramatically different bodily appearance. They're human-ish. They have a head and 2 legs and 2 arms, and are kind of like human. They're a lot more like humans than like most animals. And so it kind of calls them types of human. The Vedas actually specifically describe that there are 400 species of what they call humans. And in those, they include things like yakshas, things that are pretty different from humans, you would say, but much more like a human than like a dog.
But just like there's hundreds of species of dogs and cats is what they're.
But yeah, but some of them are pretty, like there's a pretty big difference between like a wild dire wolf and a chihuahua. You could call them both a type of dog.
Right.
So these things that are all called humans, there's a fair amount of variation among them.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like some of these humans are in these continents or worlds where there's no sin and no ignorance I don't. Now you say they have a hard time getting to enlightenment.
Yeah, there is ignorance. There is ignorance.
Sin in those worlds, I assume.
In most of them, sin is extremely rare.
Right.
By which meaning they don't hurt each other. There's no need to. There's no lack. There's no cause for greed if everything is equal and everyone has everything they want in terms of material fulfillment. No one's ever hungry, no one's ever thirsty, no one's ever sick.
Wow.
No one's ever uncomfortable. And so it's very rare for someone to hurt each other, because why would you? There's no inequality, there's no competition, there's no war. But there is ignorance. There is ignorance. They just they're not aware of the unity of all consciousness. They're not aware of Brahman. They don't transcend. They just kind of live there, enjoying sensory pleasure every day. And 1,000 years can easily go by that way without anything changing.
Wow.
Yeah. That's kind of generally the tone of it.
That's another thing I'm like trying to grasp is like, okay, if you don't wait, so they don't sin, but there's ignorance. I always like kind of put them hand in hand, like I'm like,
here ignorance tends to cause sin, because here is the world of karma. Like here people want things they don't have, and that is what drives most harmful behavior. If everybody has everything they want materially, there's very little harming each other. And it's not because they're not ignorant, it's because they're not motivated to. They're content.
Wow.
Yeah. It's very different from the way that life is here in our loka.
Well, it reminds me of how we, I mean, at least what we understand of, and like the animal, species, where a monkey is super smart, but not as nearly as smart as a human. And you're like, where does a monkey ever sin? Not really.
Yeah, I mean, it can cause suffering. It can obtain negative karma because, like, if it hurts or kills something in a territorial fight or obtaining food, and it can also attain good karma. They take good, like, they care for their children, they love each other.
Interesting.
But it's on a very different level from human. Yeah.
So much ignorance. Funny. Thanks, Devala. Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I find this stuff really interesting, talking about totally other modes of beings and other modes of life in these different celestial regions.
Right? Wow.
I'm just fascinated by all the knowledge that you guys contribute to, and thank you so much, Devala. It's like anybody can pick up anything from anywhere, and you just have something to say about it. That's the depth of knowledge. I'm so fortunate, I would say, just listening to this and knowing you. Right.
Yeah, well,
thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys. I've spent years reading all of these shastras and stuff, and it's fun to have some people who are interested to share it with. Most of these chapters are pretty obscure, like not a lot of people study this stuff. So I definitely really enjoy going through it and exploring all of its contents like this.
Right. Yep. And also, like, as you always say, right, like a lot of these are obscured and beyond the physical world, which we all try to make a sense of it and all that, but it's there, it exists, we feel it, and it's a constant quest of us, something to make a sense out of. We feel it, but we can't measure it.
Yeah.
And we can't prove it, but it's there. So it's beautiful. And how all that ancient scriptures, in those times, it probably was their vocabulary of putting it down, like as we evolve as a mankind, the words get evolved. Like they didn't have the word, like, in my book, like the quantum, but they knew about it.
Yeah,
they knew
but
about
of course they're
it.
going to describe it in a different way with a different language. Yeah,
right. So that's where I find it very fascinating, and something always makes a sense every time I listen to you, or anytime anybody's asking you a question and you just come up with, I'm like, oh, aha. Yes. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.